Khalil is on the spot. I said Farmer Khalil is on the spot. I'm not sure if this audio is going through though. Khalil, can you hear my audio? I'm talking to Khalil, see if you can hear my... Ready? Can you hear my audio, Khalil? Maybe not. Says it should be on. Oh yes, he can. All right, perfect. Thank you. Switch this back on. Hey guys. Awesome. Okay, let's do this one. See if I can become as talented as Ray is. Network connection available. Sounds a little fried. Let's see here. I don't know if this has. Hold on a second. Is that any better with the audio? Okay. Fine. Thank you, my technical assistant. Is that better for Khalil? Oh, there she is. Hi, Delia. You should see a thing that says, audio's good. Thanks, Khalil. Delia, you should see an invite to say join the live. Dr. Young, hi. Oh, do we do this? Mm-hmm. Oh, hi, guys.
Where is she?
Right there.
Why is everything dark? Okay, there we go. Hi, Delia. Hold on one. Okay. Hi. How are you?
I'm good, thank you.
Good. Good to see you. We're going to give it a couple minutes here because you know everybody's on Jamaican time.
Island
time. Yeah. We're going to give it a couple minutes and see everybody get a couple of people chance to join us because we are a little bit earlier, so they might be like, wait a minute, the time is off.
Okay.
So just give it a couple minutes here.
All righty.
If you've had a good day so far?
So far, yeah. It was a busy day outside with the kids playing and stuff because with all the shutdown, they don't get outside often.
I know, it makes it hard. Mm-hmm. It does. All right. Everybody, we're doing an audio check. So you can hear me pretty well and you can hear Dr. O'Brien pretty well. Somebody give me either a thumbs up or something. We're going to see something in a little bit. Santiago, I see you. Hi. Dr. Young, how are you doing? Okay, let's see. Hi, Pizza J.A. Thanks for joining us. Oh, Dr. Patrick, there you are.
Huh.
Jason said, okay, thanks, Jason. All right, thank you. I think we got thumbs up on the audio check, so we're good. All right, awesome. Thank you. We'll still give it a couple minutes and see. Give a couple people more time to come in while we chill. Respect for the reminder. Oh, you're welcome. We always need to remind people because there's so much going on, so we don't mind sending out reminders. Hi, Hills Farm 876. Good to see you guys. And Jackie. Hi, Jackie. Jackie Furlock. Thanks for joining us. Mm-hmm. So I'm running two things. So I forgot to tell you. So I'm trying to run Facebook Live as well as Instagram Live. So hopefully I don't mess this up. Sometimes I'm a little technically challenged.
No, you're better than I am because I couldn't do that.
Okay. Hey, we're just trying here. Good. All right. So have you seen anybody from Facebook Live today? Jennifer, I see you. Welcome. Hi, Tanya B. Good evening, Mr. Vaughn. I think I'm saying that right. Closer 81 joined us. Thank you, guys. gonna give everybody a couple more minutes.
No problem.
Hi, Trevor. Thanks for joining us. Trevor was our guest speaker last week, so we're happy to see him again. Hi, Jackie Haber. Yay. I'm having all kinds of fun people online today. This is awesome. I guess because nobody else has anything else to do, right? So you might as well just hang out. Hi, Asia. That's hilarious. This is awesome. All right, cool. Let's see. How much longer should I give everybody? Yeah, we'll probably wait till we reach about 20 people and we'll start to see what's going on. Let's see. Oh, Dwayne. Oh, wow. Hi, Dwayne. I haven't seen you in a minute. That's awesome. I'm trying to check everybody here, make sure I'm trying to say hi to as many people as I can. This is pretty cool. Everybody's getting technologically advanced.
Exactly. It's one benefit from the COVID thing is that everyone got better with a whole lot of social media, you know.
That is so true. That is so true.
Yeah.
All right. So I think we're going to go ahead and get started. All right. So thank you, everyone, for joining us. I know we're an hour early, so I hope it doesn't throw everybody's evening off too much, but get to do things a little bit earlier. I think this might be a good time because when everything starts starting up, we don't want to hinder people going out, you know, with a vibe. So this earlier thing might be a good thing, but we'll test it out and see. Okay. So guys, our guest tonight is Dr. Delia O'Brien. She's Jamaican born and raised. And so just so you know that she's a yardie like the rest of us, so we're all in it together. And she's currently an associate professor at Virginia State University's Agricultural College. And she's also a small ruminant specialist. So I won't steal your thunder, but thank you very much for joining us, Dr. O'Brien. So I want to start by you telling us your story, actually starting from Jamaica, because that's the fun part. So let's start there.
So I was born and raised in Old Harbor, St. Catherine, Quebec District. Okay. Yeah. So if anyone's out there from Old Harbor, hi, you know.
There are a couple people from Old Harbor out there.
So yeah, and I went to St. Catherine High. So I went there for high school, and when I graduated, I went to sixth form at St. Jago High. And then I migrated to the U.S. to do college. So I did my undergraduate degree at the University of Maryland, Eastern Shore, and that is like 2 hours outside of Baltimore, just to give a reference.
Okay.
And I majored in biology because, you know, growing up, your parents always say you're either going to be a doctor or a lawyer. That was it, nothing else.
That was it.
Exactly. So I went to a pre-med, and I did my entire undergrad was biology pre-med. When it came time to decide to go to med school or PT school, I chose to go physical therapy route because med school is expensive. And I went to physical therapy for a year, started working with patients, and decided no. I grew up on a farm in Quebec District, Old Harbor. We had goats, chickens, everything. So ag has always been close to my heart. And as a graduate,
give me 1 second. Okay. Give me 1 second. They can't hear? Oh, she's not. So I think we're having a little audio challenge here. Okay. So let me check 1 second. So guys, can you hear Dr. O'Brien?
Can't hear.
Can't hear Dr. Oh, on Facebook Live. So that's. Oh, okay. So I know why they can't hear because I'm using a headset. So let's do this. Let me take this off. Turn this off. So hopefully that doesn't mess up everybody else. Sorry, guys. See, just too much technology trying to happen in here at one time. It should be. Is it off now? Sorry. Give me a little technical difficulties here. Give me a second here. Oh, there you go. All right. Turn that off. All right. Facebook Live.
Can you hear us?
I think it's off. Okay.
You think it's good? Okay.
I think. Okay. There we go.
All right. So
All
just to
right.
recap really quick, grew up in Old Harbor, St. Catherine. So the audio good. Okay.
Okay.
Um, in spent most of my days growing up on my grandparents' farm in Colbeck district. We had
Okay.
we had just about everything: pigs, cattle, goats, poultry, and ag has always been close to my heart. But still, I went to school and did pre-med. Pretty soon
Okay.
into physical therapy, I went to graduate school in physical therapy. I realized that I don't know, I just didn't have that knack for dealing with sick people. It wasn't,
Okay.
it just wasn't my cup of tea. And um, a fellow graduate student was doing a research project in the College of Ag, and her research project involved goats. And I went over, she asked for some help in bleeding some goats, and I went over and I never left. So
Wow.
I did my master's in food and agricultural science. My project it focused on reproduction, looking at different synchronization protocols for meat goats. And then I went to graduate school. I did I did my undergraduate and my graduate degrees at the University of Maryland Eastern Shore. I did so, and I should have mentioned that school is a HBCU, historically Black college and university.
Yeah.
And so small college size, I really like that. And once I got done with my master's, I decided to do my PhD in food science. It was in food science because that was the only PhD program they had, but they allowed me to do a concentration. So my focus was still on hair sheep production. So it was still small ruminants. So I still got to do what I loved, but I did a meat quality aspect to fulfill the food science requirements. Yeah, so that's my educational background in a nutshell. Mhm.
Okay, so I think you already touched on what got you interested in agriculture because you grew up in it a little bit, then you tried something else and realized that was not for you, so it kind of steered you back. Okay. All right, very
Yes.
good.
Uh-huh.
Okay. All right, so tell us about your role and function at Virginia State University.
Okay, so I've been at Virginia State University for the last probably, I want to say 6.5 years. Before that, I was at Delaware State University for around 7 years. And there I was an associate professor and small ruminant specialist as well. My husband got a job in Richmond, Virginia. I got pregnant, and then I decided I need to, I need to be closer to my husband if we're going to have a baby. And so
Right.
it is, excuse me, no, you have to go to daddy. Mhm. I'm sorry, one of my children, yes. Right, no, I only have one child, but my niece is here too. The baby needs to sleep. Okay, thank you for telling me that. All right, the baby needs to sleep. Okay.
That's okay.
I'm sorry, guys. But so I guess I even lost my train of thought.
You moved to
Virginia,
with your
yes.
husband.
I got
Yeah.
pregnant, so I had to move. I left my job in Delaware. I moved to Virginia, and shortly after moving, a position opened up at Virginia State University, which is another historically Black college and university. And so, being that my work, my research focus on small ruminants, the only places that do that in the States are land grant institutions. So they're going to be like in Virginia, there are two. So there's Virginia Tech and there's Virginia State University. And the one closest to Richmond is VSU. But a job opened up. I applied. I got it. And so I've been working here since. I'm 100% extension. Um, so most of my focus is on conducting programs for our producers, and a small piece on conducting applied research projects and getting that information out to producers as well. Yeah.
Very good. And guys, yes, I'm on the farm, so you will hear any animal at any random time. All right, very good. So are you currently doing any personal farming?
So I am not doing any personal farming right now. I I hope to that's in the future. Um, Once my son gets out of high school, goes to college, I'm dreaming of getting that farm. Yeah,
Okay.
and starting. Yeah.
No backyard garden, no nothing,
Huh?
no no backyard
I
garden,
do have a
nothing.
small. I that this year was the first year I actually tried that. So I do have a
Okay.
raised bed garden outside with just about some
Very nice.
scallion and thyme and I tried to grow some Scotch bonnet peppers. I have not been successful yet. So I'm drying some more seeds to put out there. So if anyone has any tips, let me know.
Okay. I don't because I don't have a green thumb.
Exactly. My husband usually does that stuff.
Cabbage today,
Uh-huh.
hold on, I'll post it so everybody can see it. My very first cabbage. So I was very excited.
Mhm.
All
Yeah,
right.
but and
So
I should mention I do have two guinea pigs. Two guinea
two guinea.
pigs, and that's it. No
Oh,
cats, no dogs, just two guinea pigs. And
all right.
we have from time to time raised sheep in the garage, which is which is interesting.
Okay, that's a whole different story, but that's okay. We'll
We
talk
have
about.
from time to time. Yeah.
All right. Very. So let's get more into the heart of the matter. So let's talk a little bit more about what your specialty is. And so I know that's reproduction and hair sheep production. So that was pretty interesting for me. And you also have lots of time in or lots of experience in parasite control,
And
which
parasite
is
control.
huge
Yeah,
for small. It's a huge for the small ruminant industry. So inform us
exactly.
about your work first of all on reproduction, and maybe there's some new things that are going on that we may not have heard of, some other projects that you worked on that you can probably inform us about.
Mhm. Okay, so I mentioned that I did my master's on increasing the reproductive efficiency of meat goats. So we were basically trying to find the best synchronization techniques or estrus induction techniques that could allow you to have an accelerated kidding program. So we did that, and at Delaware, I looked at some more programs, and this is basically just most of you are aware that sheep and goats are seasonal breeders, and in order to have a continuous supply of say lamb or goat meat, especially in the U.S., you'd have to have multiple lamb or kid crops. Most of the systems here don't leave their males running with the females. So at any minute you could go out and see babies on the ground. It's somewhat more structured where most producers that breed in the fall and lamb or kid in the spring. Um, we were investigating techniques, synchronization techniques that would allow producers to breed multiple times to have 3 kittens over a 2-year period. And so what I used was a feed supplement. There's a feed supplement in the cattle industry here in the US. It has melangestrol acetate in it, and it's a progesterone supplement. So
Mm-hmm.
it's the concept of it was perfect because it's in a pelleted feed. They use it in the cattle industry to suppress estrus in females. And so we just took that and fed it to our meat goats, and found that that was effective in inducing estrus during the non-breeding season, and we were able to get our goats to breed multiple times throughout the year um, doing that. Moving forward, I also looked at some other synchronization methods, but then, as you mentioned before, parasites sort of overtook everything. Once I started working, and that was my first job at Delaware, most of my questions, the questions I was getting, or from producers, and the feedback that I was getting from or extension agents or folks on the ground was that goats know how to breed. Bucks know, they know how to breed. We
You know
don't
what
need,
they're doing.
yeah, we don't need help with that. What we need help with is controlling parasites. That's
Okay.
that's the biggest thing. And so I think I've spent more time since my graduation working with control of parasites and ways of characterizing deworm resistance on farms than I have on reproduction per se. But when I left Delaware and I came to Virginia State, my colleague, he's a reproductive physiologist, so I got to dip my feet back into repro a bit. And one thing that we've been working on, so it's nothing as technologically savvy as embryo transfer or anything like that. But he, when I came here, he was working on a vaginal, a chill semen vaginal artificial insemination protocol in hair sheep. Okay, so it's not like typical insemination for anyone, and he works with hair sheep. So if anyone has ever tried to or know anything about sheep reproduction, their cervix doesn't open up like a doe's, like a goat's. It's very hard to penetrate their cervix with an AI gun to inseminate them. And that's why for many years, laparoscopic artificial insemination has been the route to go with sheep. But in other countries in Europe, they use vaginal insemination. And so my colleague developed that technique. And once I got here, I worked with him to implement it on farms in Virginia. Okay. To see how, we know it works in our university setting, but again, our university setting, our animals get fed ideally. They're cared for optimally, and we wanted to see what would happen if we take it to producer farms and see what would happen. So when I say it's vaginal insemination, so when you're using that AI gun, you're just going up at a 45-degree angle. You're not penetrating the cervix. You're not doing anything. You're depositing the semen right there in the anterior vagina. And we're not using frozen semen. We're using chilled semen, which is semen that's fresh chilled semen, so it was collected the same day. So it's meant to say for instance you had hair sheep and you had a ram that was had really good genetics, looked really good, and say somebody who was on the other part of the island wanted that genetics. This procedure would be ideal for someone like you, because you could do semen collection on your farm. We could extend that semen, put it into straws, and then travel a couple hours to another farm to share those genetics without that farmer having to purchase an animal from you or borrow, your stud or lease your ram. And we found that we got anywhere from about 40 to 70% conception with the vaginal artificial insemination in hair sheep. So I think that I know that there are not that many hair sheep farms in Jamaica, right? Because I don't.
No. So Dr. Young, join in on the sheep discussion there. Anybody else that know about how many? I'm not sure what the count is, so I would not be the person to answer that. But I do know there are some sheep.
Yeah, because I could tell, I've noticed that, in coming back to Jamaica over the years, I'm seeing more and more sheep farms. And I think you guys have some Barbados blackbellies too. And that's what we have at Virginia State University. We have Barbados blackbellies and St. Croix. And we have those, or we raise them at Virginia State University because producers are looking, there's no money in wool anymore. And so what's the sense in raising wool sheep if you're raising them just for meat? And we already know that hair sheep are very hardy animals. They're heat tolerant. They're parasite resistant. The St. Croix would top the list on that for parasite resistance. They're very hardy animals, and they tend to put on weight or fatten on less feed than the other breeds that are out there. But there's a lot of interest in hair sheep in the U.S. And what a lot of producers are doing, they're buying up hair sheep for their maternal flock. And then they're buying a wool ram to do a crossbreeding system to put that male with a faster growth and carcass traits to cross that animal to produce larger offspring to market. And then you don't have to worry about the wool. because the crossbred animal wouldn't have, wouldn't have that wool. Here, sheep shed naturally, and they don't have to worry about shearing, and you could market that animal. So it's really popular, and that's why we have those breeds at the university, and we're working with them. And yeah, and so this technique that we introduced to producers, there was a lot of interest in it. We have the largest Barbados black belly flock in the United States, and a lot of folks were interested in getting or genetics. And so it provided a good means. We would collect the semen at our farm, travel with it extended and chilled, and we'd go to the producer farm and do a vaginal insemination. And we would get,
So,
yeah.
Sorry not to cut you, but is that something that could be used in goats? Because most of my audience primarily have goats. So is that something
we did
we bring to goats?
Yeah, so we did it once. We did one study using meat goats, and I want to say we got one pregnant, but it again, we haven't done it at the university site, and it might just be we used a similar process of extending the semen to what we did in sheep. And so we might need to take a different approach. We might need to start from from that angle, from collection, change it up to fit or match goats better, and then take it. But we've always been interested in doing some more goat research, but yeah, we just don't have. We have a goat herd at the university too, but we've got 5 other researchers, and they use the goats. Yeah, so we would love to try it on goats, but for now, we've done artificial insemination clinics, and trained producers in how to do transcervical AI on meat goats, because that's the most common technique now. Yeah.
All right. So let's move the discussion along and talk more about parasites, because that's huge. And guys, I want to give you one of the quotes that I heard from Dr. O'Brien, and she says, "We could talk about parasites all day." Now, we won't do that today.
I'll try to condense it, because sometimes, yeah, when I get started,
yeah, because it's a huge challenge for many farms.
It is.
So, one thing you said in your presentation, real quick, sorry, is that every farm, everywhere in the world has challenges with parasite and parasite control. So guys, we're not alone. So you want to talk a little bit about other farms in the world and the challenges, how you guys have worked through it?
Exactly.
Okay.
Definitely not. I'm a member of the American Consortium for Small Ruminant Parasite Control, and it's a group of extension specialists and veterinarians, parasitologists from across the U.S. At first, it was focused mostly in the southern U.S. because that's where the majority of the parasite problems were. But as we've seen, we have northern states too that are affected by parasites. And so we extended it and opened it up to be an American consortium. And even more than that, we have members or honorary members who are from South Africa, Australia, other countries in the world. Parasites, #1 issue all over the world. It is.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Can you tell exactly what a parasite is, or how they different types? Again, because we have a wide range of people, so we want to make sure that everybody knows.
Okay, so basically a parasite, it's something that basically, it derives its nutrients for its development and growth from a host. Okay, and so you can hear people talk about internal or external parasite. It just depends on where that parasite is. So your external parasites are your ticks and your mites and so forth. Your internal parasites, now that's the big issue. That's the issue everyone's dealing with. We have in your internal parasites, so you've got your nematodes, which are your roundworms. So this would include your barber pole worm or your Haemonchus contortus that most of us that have sheep and goats will be familiar with. And it's called a barber pole worm because it's a blood-sucking parasite. And if you should cut open the true stomach or abomasum of a sheep and goat that's infected, you can actually see these parasites. They're about an inch long inside as an adult. The males are all red, and the females are red and white. So they have their reproductive tract is white, their digestive system is red because they're sucking blood, and it wraps around each other, and that's why they say barber pole worm, because of that. But not only is barber pole worm a problem, but there are other parasites, your trichostrongylus, or your bankrupt worm, and your teledorsasia. Those could be problematic parasites as well. And usually when we see parasite infections, it's usually a mixed infection, even though the majority will be your barber pole worm. So those are your roundworms, and then you have your you do have your cestodes as well. So those are your flatworms or your tapeworms, and then the trematodes, which are your liver flukes. So it could be a range of parasites depending on where you are. But if you live in a climate like Jamaica, I guarantee you, if you do a larval ID, the number one parasite is going to be that Haemonchus contortus or barber pole worm. That's what we see in our southern states. In places, Florida, it is a critical issue, and the reason why is because they like warmth and moisture.
Okay.
They need that.
So what would you recommend for fighting this parasite?
Okay. How much time do we have? Oh gosh. So
We'll talk about this for a while now because it's going to help their
right.
farm.
So to condense that, so there are a number of things that you can do, and I think one of the biggest thing is understanding the life cycle of this parasite. I think you have to work with the biology of the animal, the biology of the worm itself, the parasites, in order to come up with effective parasite control strategies. But what we train in past, traditionally, we and this was years ago, before I think I even went to grad school. Veterinarians used to preach deworming to prevent. All right, so they were telling deworm your animals every 6 weeks if you have a parasite problem, and that will keep it at bay. All right, so over the years, overuse and misuse has led to dewormer resistance. My lab conducted it while I was in Delaware. My graduate student conducted a study evaluating, or characterizing rather, the extent of dewormer resistance on farms in the mid-Atlantic US. And we found, of the 3 classes of dewormers that are available for use in the US, your benzimidazoles, which are your white drenches, macrocyclic lactones, which are your ivermectin and moxidectin, and your nicotinic agonists, which is your levamisole. Those drugs, what we found, that 100% of farms tested had resistance to the benzimidazoles. So your benzimidazoles would safeguard valbazen. 100% of the farms had resistance.
Okay, what's resistance?
So resistance, exactly. So resistance, essentially, we consider a parasite. We consider parasites to be resistant to a drug when they fail to kill 95% or greater of those worms. So you look at a fecal egg count reduction test, and if you have a reduction of less than 95%, that drug is considered to be resistant. So it's important to note that a drug that's 90%, if a 90% efficacy, or even 85% efficacy, that drug still is getting rid of clinical symptoms when you use it. But the more you use it, you're going to build and develop resistance in your herd, because no drug, even if a new drug is introduced, it'll be 99% effective. All right, so resistance is inevitable, and the more you use it, especially for these worms like the barber pole worm and trichostrongylus, they're prolific, and so the more you expose them to this drug, is the more they basically build up this resistance, and you're just making the issue worse. So we did that study in the US, and we found that all farms tested had resistance to those drenches, Safeguard, Valbazen. When it came to the ivermectin, 76% of the farms were resistant to that, and similar. Moxidectin was a little bit lower, and then your levamisole was lower in the 24% than that. But we did discover that in most of the farms had resistance to multiple drugs. And we only have 3 classes that are available, so most of you might know that ivermectin and moxidectin are in the same class. So if you already have resistance to one drug in a class, even though they're different and you're looking at them and they have different trade names, it just depends on the active ingredient. And if resistance has developed to one drug in that class, then likely is that resistance is gonna be to other drug in the same class. And so that opened our eyes, especially in the mid-Atlantic, because there was a research done in the southern US before that indicated that resistance was a problem. But we thought a mid-Atlantic area with our temperate, climate, we had a winter season, and so folks weren't using dewormers as much, so it wouldn't have been so big a problem. But we found that it was higher than we thought it was, and it was worse on goat farms than on sheep farms. It was.
So, all right. So there's a question that came in that says, so it's wise to rotate dewormer drugs, which kind of segues into one of the things we wanted. Okay, go ahead and answer that.
So I didn't get to the whole treatment. So I wanted to talk about the resistance part first, just to let you guys know that. So we have to approach how we use chemicals different. That's the whole thing, because the more we're using these dewormers, and especially if we're deworming every single animal in a group, if we think about it, every animal has worms inside of them that are susceptible and resistant. If we deworm and our dewormer is effective, if we deworm every animal in a group with an effective, say it's 95% effective, the only thing that's passing onto your pasture is going to be resistant, because you've done your job in killing the susceptible. It's the resistant ones that are left to lay eggs and pass onto your pasture. And so you're populating your pastures with resistant worms, right? So the new, and I'm sure most of you are familiar with this, is you only treat, you do targeted selective treatment, and you only treat those animals that have clinical symptoms in your herd. And we used to recommend, when resistance started being an issue, we used to recommend that you rotate your dewormers. And what we found is that we've stopped recommending that. We're saying don't rotate your dewormers and actually use combination treatments. Okay. So when you're rotating your dewormers, say one dewormer, because and there hasn't been any extensive study done in Jamaica to characterize drug resistance that I know of. We tried to get that done a couple of years ago. We're still interested. A few of my colleagues and I are still interested in doing that. So you can tell me, your producers can tell me more, I'm deworming with ivermectin and it seems to not be doing anything, or I'm deworming with Safeguard, nothing's, they're not bouncing back. That's sort of how you know that that your animals have developed resistance or not, is if you're treating them with a drug and they're just not bouncing back anymore. But it would be good to do an extensive study to characterize the level of resistance on farms in Jamaica, especially in that climate and the rainy season, and everything. I would love to be able to do that data and see. But if you have 2 drugs, say you're using Safeguard and you're using ivermectin, and say Safeguard is 90% effective and ivermectin is 75% effective, or even less, 70% effective, then by rotating drugs, you're going from one that's highly effective to one that's not as effective. You see what I'm saying? So
Okay.
if you're rotating it and going back and forth, then your treatment at one time isn't going to be as efficient as that, as the other time. And moreover, when you're deworming with one drug and you're deworming with the other, it's building up resistance to two drugs at the same time.
Oh, okay.
If that
Okay.
makes sense, because you're not just using,
Yeah.
when we had started saying don't rotate your dewormers, then we had started saying use one dewormer until that one fails and then start on another dewormer. That was the recommendation. But in New
Okay.
Zealand they did a study, and they in New Zealand they have access to drugs that are combination drugs. So they have more than one active ingredient in their drugs. In other countries in the world, we don't have that in the US. But New Zealand, they did a study where basically showed us that that combination treatments, that is deworming, if an animal shows clinical signs and you're still using targeted selective treatment. I see somebody put there FAMACHA. You're still using
Yeah.
your FAMACHA. You're still using, those are the tools that we have to deworm more animals, right? To decide who needs deworming or not. We use tools such as the FAMACHA score, and I'm not sure how many of you have heard about the 5-point check. All right, so
Yes, you can do a quick review for us.
okay, so the FAMACHA, it assesses an animal for their degree of anemia, and anemia is due to the blood-sucking parasite, the barbacore worm. And in the parasite season, if you see, and I guess in Jamaica all year, if you know that you're feeding right and your animal isn't nutritionally deficient, if they're anemic,
Mhm.
then it tends to be parasites, due to parasites, right? And so the FAMACHA score assesses their eye on a scale of of 1 to 5, with 1 being bright red and healthy and 5 being pale, basically at death's door, pale white. And I have some good pictures of that if anyone wants to see it. But I'm sure most of you, if you're producers, you might have seen it before. But you would deworm a 4 and a 5 that are pale, and you leave a 1 and a 2 alone, and a 3 that would just be based on other clinical symptoms. So the FAMACHA in and of itself, it just looks at the eye. So we were training folks to look at your animals, look at their eyes. If they're pale, deworm them. If they're not, leave them alone, because that
Yes.
leaves a few animals and the worms that are inside of those animals in refuge from the drug, right? So they're
Okay.
passing susceptible worms onto the pasture, while the ones that you dewormed, they will only be passing resistant worms. So it's basically diluting the worms on the pasture. But the 5-point check, this one, it takes everything into consideration. So the 5-point check actually looks at the eye, it looks at the FAMACHA score. It looks at the condition, the body condition score of that animal, to see if is it gaining condition or is it losing condition. And if it's losing condition, then you might need to deworm that animal. Still, it looks at the tail. It looks for a DAG score, or fecal soiling. So on a scale of 0 to 5, with 0 being no fecal soiling and 5 being fecal soiling all the way down to the hocks. So if an animal has diarrhea and that's a consideration, you would deworm that animal. It looks at, in goats, it looks at coat condition, and it looks at the bottle jaw. In sheep, it looks at the nose, for nose spots. But these two tools were developed in South Africa, and they were developed in response to dewormer resistance. So we use those to determine who we should deworm.
Okay.
All right. So those
Okay.
are the tools that you use. And while you're using those tools, when you find an animal that needs to be dewormed, the researchers in New Zealand found that if you deworm them with a dewormer from each class, so say you use the most effective dewormer from that class, which for the US, that would be valbazen, Cydectin, which is just moxidectin, and prohibit or levamisole. We give them, we dose them with, not, we don't mix it or anything. We pull up the exact dose for their weight. We drench them with say valbazen, then drench them again with Cydectin, then drench them again with the prohibit or levamisole. And those researchers have found that they have an additive effect. So if one drug is 80% effective, then the second drug will knock out so it knocks out 80% of the worms. The second drug will knock out a specific percentage of the 20% that's left based on its efficacy. And the third would do the remaining. And so when you combine them, you can have an efficacy all the way up to 99 point something percentage, depending on how effective each drug is. But by combining them with that additive effect, you are getting a better response. And what you're doing, say compared to using one dewormer that's 80% effective, when you deworm an animal with one dewormer and it's 80% effective, it's killing 80% of the worms, and 20% are left over to reproduce and lay. They're passing resistant worms onto your pasture. That's 20%. When you combine all 3 dewormers and you get up to an efficacy of 90 something percent, then then an efficacy from up to 90 something percent, then it's less resistant worms that you're passing onto your farm. And what they found is that in New Zealand, in some cases, this has reverted back to higher efficacy in the individual drugs, because every time you're combining your dewormers.
Big deal KFC. Did you see the comment?
It's big
KFC. That's why. So that's one approach then, is to do a combination, like a little cocktail thing.
Exactly.
Depending on the efficacy.
Cocktail.
Yeah. So layman's terms here, the effectiveness of the drug. All right.
So you have to work. Yeah, so you got to use FAMACHA and the 5-point check, determine the need to deworm, and then you deworm them with combination treatment. And that's the most effective way, and that is the way to that is the most effective way, and that is the way to reduce the development of resistance. Because you in Jamaica probably have more access to FDA approved drugs. I'm not sure. But in the US, we only have few drugs. We have a drug from each class FDA approved for use in sheep. For goats, we have less drugs approved, and a lot of the drugs that we use in goats are extra label drug use. So we have to, we should work with our veterinarians to drench our animals. But you might have access. I'm not sure if you have access to different classes from New Zealand, like Zolvix and all that you do there.
Dr. Young and Dr. Patrick and Khalil, if you know what we have access to. I know we have Safeguard. I know we have ivermectin. Not sure what else. But
I think
those 2 common ones.
Yeah, I think you have a Levamed. I think you have one. Yeah, you do have one from.
I just don't know the name because I'm still. All right.
Yeah, but go ahead.
There was an approach that I read in your article that said using like a fasting and a 12-hour interval method. I thought that was pretty interesting. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Okay, so there are ways that we can make this is basically for if it's if a drug is still highly effective, if it's still, even though there might be some resistance present, if it's still highly effective, then there's strategies you could employ to make the drug be more effective. Some things are, you can fast that animal. So by fasting that animal and taking them off feed for 12 to 24 hours, then you could that basically slows down their gut motility. So when you drench them, it leaves the drugs in contact with the worms longer. It slows down that gut motility. So you could try that. There are, you could also try deworming with the same drug twice, so 12 hours apart, with the exception of levamisole because of it has a smaller margin of safety. Then you would drench, give 2 doses at 24 hours apart. But this is for drugs that are still somewhat effective. And still, the more you use these drugs, you're contributing to resistance, and that's why we're moving to that combination, the combination dewormer. But there's some other things that you should be doing with the combination dewormers too. Is that you should be weighing your animals. I'm sure none of you have seen a dewormer out there that doesn't say a specific milligram per kilogram of body weight. So one of the biggest things, and that led to resistance, is that we were underdosing our animals. And if we were deciding how to deworm them, then we would say, oh, on average they weigh about 100 pounds. So I'm going to, deworm everyone for 100 pounds. When there were some animals heavier than that, so you were underdosing them, and that was just not killing the worms and making them develop resistance. So you have to weigh your animals. Even if there are estimates out there online for using their length and heart girth, um, we do recommend that folks either come together as a group to buy a scale and weigh your animals, but at least you should be having an idea of how heavy your animals are. And then the next thing is how you drench them. A lot of folks will pull it up in a syringe and then they'll just put it at the mouth, at the front of the mouth. I've seen a lot of producers do this and basically let the goat suck on the syringe for deworming. And what that does is that closes the esophageal groove, and the medicine bypasses their rumen and goes straight to the abomasum. For a drug to be most effective, it needs to travel the same path as the worms. So it doesn't need to bypass the rumen. It should go. It should go to the rumen. So those are some little things that are important that we have to make sure we're doing right. We're using the correct dose and we're administering the drugs the right way. I keep seeing these questions on there, and it's just it's just making my mind run on everything. I'm trying not, because as I said, there's so much about parasite control. But some other things that you can do is that pasture rotation. Very helpful. Remember the larvae, so we're all familiar with the parasite life cycle. So these adults inside, they lay eggs in the manure on the pasture. If the conditions are right, which in Jamaica they're probably right all year round, they're gonna hatch into larvae, develop into an infective stage, and then they move up and down the blade of grass on dewdrops, right? And 80% of these larvae, infective larvae, are going to be 4 inches or below. So one of the first things that we should be thinking about is not letting our animals graze too low. Prevent them from grazing too low. And the more browse we allow them to have access to, because goats like to browse, they're natural browsers. They don't like to graze like sheep, or cattle or other species. They are natural browsers. They go on their hind leg and they pull branches down. So we should let them do what they do naturally. And we should let them browse and not eat so close to the ground. And we've got to be careful, because sometimes what we do too is force them to do that. I know for a lot of farms we have in the US, they congregate around waterers or they congregate around feeders. And that's the areas where the grass is the lowest. And so they'll stay right around there. That exposes them to the parasite larvae. So anything that you're doing to limit their exposure to the larvae, that again, 80%, 4 inches or below. So if all you're doing is just eyeballing and just making sure it doesn't get too low, and then you move them off that pasture. And one important thing to remember when we're thinking about the biology of that worm too, is that once that egg is passed in the manure and they hatch to a larvae, to an infective larvae, it takes about 4 to 5 days. So if we have animals on a paddock, from the moment they start passing their manure, in 5 days, in 4 to 5 days, they're going to start reinfecting themselves. They're going to start picking up larvae that they themselves dropped on that pasture. So a lot of our pasture rotation here in the States they're moving them in 3 days or less. So that they're not.
So that wasn't going to be my next question.
Yeah, they're not reinfecting.
So
Exactly.
Okay. Yeah. So if this guys answered the question we saw earlier about what causes parasites, and it is that they're eating in the same long and they're picking up the worms.
Exactly. The life cycle is just that. They live right there on. If any animal who's raised on pasture, they're gonna get exposed to worms. That's it. And we want, they're naturally. I mean, they've lived, together for centuries like this. Animals have always had parasites. The goal is not to prevent them from getting parasites. The goal is to keep keep them from having clinical symptoms. So it's to use these tools, this pasture rotation, targeted selective treatment, if multi-species grazing. So if you have cattle and horses, sheep and goats have the same parasites. Cattle and horses have different parasites. So if you make them graze together, or you lead with sheep and goats followed by cattle and horses, they help to clean up that pasture before you bring the animals back again. Because in theory, when you move the animals off, it takes, if it's a highly infested pasture, it's going to take about at least 3 months or so from a pasture to go from highly infested to low infestation. So, so a lot of that.
So what about grass found in the walkway heading to the houses?
So anywhere there's grass, then they're gonna be able to if they're defecating anywhere near that grass, because remember, these eggs are in the manure. And once if they're defecating right there on any piece of grass, then they can hatch and become infective larvae. So some of the new things that one new tool that I don't want to forget to mention, and again, I do not know how available. Huh?
1 second. We have
Sorry.
1 minute and 45. No, that's fine. So here's what I'll do. We're going to end the live, guys, but we'll come right back on. Okay, so everybody could come back because we still have to get to your questions. I'm going to end it now, and we'll come right back. Okay, guys? See you in 5 seconds or less.
All right.
In a little bit.